So thank you very much for introducing me. So I'm talking about optimizing BUT, and I will, for the time's sake, skip a few things that have been already expertly been covered by the previous people. So symptoms and the degranulation of mast cells. I will just quickly point you to what's important for MediBut that we do, that it is an antigen-specific and IgE-mediated reaction or test that we look at. So Ollie also mentioned a few things here. So I will just point you to our two markers that we are looking at after basophils are stimulated. So on one hand, we have the previously mentioned CD63, which is a degranulation marker that is localized in these histamine vesicles that get expressed on the cell surface after histamine release. And there's also CD203C, which is our activation marker, and this is already present on resting basophils, but gets significantly elevated or upregulated upon induction of basophil activation. And we also look at this stimulation index that you have already heard before. So what we would consider a positive value would be over 2 in the SI. And this is true for both CD63 and CD203C. And my talk covers mostly last year's data that we collected in our routine. We tested over the whole year of 2023 908 patients, and of these we had 6.2% that were positive. We could identify 72 substances, and the top drugs or drug classes that we found were culprit drugs, were beta-lactams, proton pump inhibitors, and also the prior mentioned excipients such as polysorbate 20 and 80. And this is just routine data, so it's not a statistics. So we are testing also for alternatives or people with not so clear reactions. So the rather low positivity rate, unfortunately, is to be expected. But still, we want to do the best test that we can. And so we wanted to also see how we fare against competition and other things that are on the market. So the difference between our test and commercial kits that are available usually comes down to that we test routinely 3 concentrations for each substance, and commercial kits recommend usually 1 or 2 concentrations. And we look at the 2 previously mentioned markers, whereas kits sometimes only look at CD63, which is mostly due to the fact that CD203C already is elevated by the addition of IL-3 that we also add to our basophils to facilitate degranulation. Oliver already mentioned this in the CU-BUT, and this is also helpful in the regular MediBut. So they have that in their working buffers that are already pre-made, so they only cover the CD63. And while the standardized setup of the kits usually is very easy and cool, what we are able to do is much more flexible. We are able to adapt to the patient needs or the customers, the clinicians' wishes that we do. And since our test falls under in-house IVD, we have currently an application that is ongoing. So we wanted to know, since we are doing a bit broader of a range, if we are actually doing a better job at finding positive BUTs. So of all our 72 positive substances that we found, 25 of these were positive using also theoretically the conditions or concentrations that would be recommended by commercial kits. Of the remaining 47 substances, 25 would not actually be available to test if you were just using commercial sources. Of the 22 other remaining substances, they are only positive using our concentrations, and I will cover that now. So, lastly, altogether, if even considering our rather low-seeming positivity rate at ADR-AC, if we were using just commercial conditions, we would only find about 1/3 of these cases. So, talking of concentrations, let me quickly give you a rundown here, how we get to those conditions. We look at pharmacokinetics, physiological conditions such as plasma max concentration for each drug. They vary between modes of application. They can also be significantly higher at the point of entry depending on the mode of application. And we also want to make sure that each drug that we test is neither toxic to basophils in our test tube, nor is it unspecifically activating the cells. So we test that individually for each patient, for each drug with unexposed patients. An example now here from last year is metamizole, which was positive a few times. Recommended kit conditions would be the highest concentration at roughly 10 micrograms per ml, which is around the plasma max concentration. We, however, do go a bit higher in the concentrations. And as you can see in, this one, I'm sorry. As you can see here, most of the elevation, the positive SI, is in the higher concentrations, the 500 and 100 micrograms per ml conditions. And also what you can see over here with the CD203C, it shows you a much more sensitive and clear picture when looking at these substances in patients. So if you would only look at the recommended kit conditions, you would only have this very narrow window. So if you look at that, only 1 out of 8 patients will be considered positive. So our setup seems to be more sensitive. And since we are higher than the recommended condition, I want to just quickly show that there is no unspecific activity. Here we have 5 donors that were unexposed, and you can clearly see that none of them get activated unspecifically, even in higher doses. So our concentrations do not lead to unspecific activation. So altogether, our higher or increased sensitivity is mostly related to our broad library of substances that we test, the inclusion of the CD203C marker, which is highly sensitive, and also that we are testing a broader concentration range. This then led to the question that if we would further increase the testing concentration range, might that maybe improve the basophil activation test further? So that brings us to amoxicillin, which is the most frequently tested substance in BAT, in roughly a third of all tests that we did in 2023. But only 1.4% of those were positive. We tested at 500 micrograms per ml, which is also the recommended kit condition concentration. But there are studies that go higher, and they also show positivity in more than 2 milligrams per ml. So routinely, what we've seen so far is that in amoxicillin, if it's positive, usually it's in the higher concentration range. Oh, sorry. Button, and the higher concentration range, so 500 and 100. And again, as same as with metamizole, you also see this clearer picture here with CD203C. And what's especially interesting is that if you take note of this specific patient, this patient was only positive in the CD203C marker and none of the others, but you see there is a very clear picture there. So if you would only be looking at CD63, you might miss this one. So you have to take all of these into account and make sure that you look at them all together. Now, starting this year, we wanted to add more concentrations, higher concentrations to our test setup. So we added 2 more concentrations. And here I show you the preliminary results of a few positive BAT cases that we had this year. And at first glance, there is no general pattern that springs to the eye. There are some where higher concentrations boost the activation and lead to a stronger activation, such as the red and green curves that you see. But there are also others where there is either it stays the same, or there is a stagnation even at higher concentrations, such as the purple here, and also in the blue in the middle, CD63 without IL-3 condition. And this could theoretically be to some kind of post-zone effect where the allergen is just too present that it then actually hinders the ability of the basophils to be activated by cross-linking. And all in all, it might boost, but there seems to be also differences between patients that need to be taken into account. And since this part of the session is called News from the Lab, I bring you something that is very new. It is so new that it is actually from this week. And we had a case with a Medibat that we were testing for intravenous iron solutions. And this hypersensitivity to these solutions seems to be a very rare event, but it is somewhat feared in clinics. The mechanism is not really known. There seems to not be any direct IgE involvement to be previously demonstrated. There might be some complement involvement, but it is rarely seen. And up until now, we have never seen a positive BAT. But from all our knowledge, we know that the iron solutions in our BAT are not toxic, so that is already a good thing. So how did it actually end up looking? So this is not that important, but historically the iron solutions were quite toxic, and then they were made more applicable using carbohydrate shells, mainly dextran. And the current forms that are now used, Ferinject, Monofer, and Venofer, are now using maltose complexes or saccharose complex in the Venofer case. Yeah, there's a note of that. So here is the BAT that we had, and you see there were two substances that were activating the basophils quite nicely, and they were both the maltose derivatives Ferinject and Monofer. Venofer did not show any increase, but as you can see, the curves are slightly dipping to the higher concentrations, so this also could be due to some saturation effect. And then we decided that we wanted to also expand the testing range and also go a bit lower this time. And this is what we then saw. So similarly, in the repetition, Ferinject Monofer stayed positive. However, there seems to be almost a peak condition or a best concentration range around 10 to 100 micrograms per ml that seems to be activating basophils the most. So again, this is also to show you that the actual window, the range that you want to test in basophil activation test is quite important, because if you do it high, you might miss the window where it's actually positive. So even though this now is a BAT, and this is usually IgE involved, this does not directly prove that this is an actual IgE involvement that is responsible for this. And we want to test this further, and we might do this with a BTK inhibitor such as ibrutinib that might give us some further insights here. So that brings us to the end. So our test seems to be more sensitive, more robust, and this is mostly due to the higher amount of substances that we test, that we have a broader testing range, and we also include the more specific marker CD203C. The ranging of concentration is very important. There seems to be some cases where there's an elevation in higher concentrations. Sometimes it does not help, so it is still to be considered with its limits. And specificity and unspecificity is unique to each substance, so you need to really look at it in each case, and it needs to be adapted for each case. And this new, it is not new, but this post-zone effect is also something that we saw now a bit. But we are still looking for ways to improve the BAT further, to increase maybe drug and IgE binding or avidity. And we hope that maybe during the next symposium, we might show you some new developments there. And yes, that brings us to the end. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kevin. So if you call us and you get a very friendly person on the telephone, it's always Kevin Kammermann. Are there any questions? Yes, Daniel?
So actually, I would like to come back quickly to the beta-lactam and amoxicillin, because here you try to change to modify the concentration, but actually amoxicillin is also known to be a hapten. Have you tried something to boost the adduct formation?
Yes, we've done so in the past, where we were aware that there might be some improvement by based on the pH of the solutions that we are using, and we tried to prepare acidic, basic, and neutral solutions of amoxicillin that might lead to better hapten formation. We tested it for a while, but we never saw an increase in the positivity. So at some point we dropped it and looked for other things to explore.
Yes, please, Sabine.
Do you also have data with the IgE levels to penicillin, for example? Can you say, is there a correlation with the IgE or not at all, or you don't know?
We have not yet tested for that. This is still rather new. It's of this year, but we do have serum samples for most, so we could go and explore that. And I mean, IgE to amoxicillin is a standard test, so this is possible. But currently, we don't have this information. But yeah, we would also test probably for total IgE then to see how the levels will be.
Okay. Are there any further questions? I hope you have gotten some impressions that we try to improve tests if we are not happy with themselves sometimes.